We try to be the peacekeeper and keep everybody happy around us, but that is at the expense of our own peace. So what we want to do is be the creator of peace, the creator of our own internal peace. And that requires that we speak up, that we have integrity, that we hold boundaries, so that we can have the clarity in the decisions and the movement and the choices forward. But the only way to do that is to be really aware of what is going on for you. So actually taking those few minutes, learning how to check in, ask yourself, what do you need right now? Is an investment in your long-term ability to have really healthy relationships with other people. But it starts with ourselves. And so when we want to co-parent well and better, it begins with being more honest with ourselves so that we understand what our values actually are, what is actually important to us, instead of just reacting or letting everyone else decide.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life in marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. This week we have a guest here. We have Mikki Gardner. So she's going to be diving into the whole big world of co-parenting, which some of you may not have direct experience in, but hold that thought because we're going to dive into how you actually do have experience in that. And I have tons of experience with this, right? Because I am a stepmom myself, if you're new to me. And I am really excited to dive into this because we haven't really gone into the world of parenting with co-parents too much, right? You might have heard me dabble a little bit in it, but I'm really excited to actually dive into this more deeply with you because it does impact so many of you out here. And I want to make sure that you know of Mikki because she's the person to go to support you in this. If you are struggling in this journey of co-parenting with your ex or with your partner's ex, whatever your situation is, because it pretty much affects all areas of your life, and we're going to get into it. So I'm so excited to introduce you to Mikki Gardner. She is a certified life and conscious parenting coach, the host of Co-Parenting with Confidence podcast, author of The People Pleaser's Guide to Co-Parenting Well, and a mom to her son. After learning how to navigate life post-divorce and using it as a catalyst to her own transformation, Mikki now helps moms move past the divorce drama to become calm, confident co-parents, even without their ex's participation. Mikki is on a mission to help women navigate the emotional and practical difficulties of divorce and co-parenting while creating an intentional, joy, and ease-filled life after divorce. That is like the dream, I'm sure, for so many divorced people because they're like, what? I would not put those things in the same sentence. So I'm thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for being here, Mikki.
Oh, Michelle, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you and your audience today.
Yeah. So before we get into it, can you share with us a little bit about yourself? Where do you live and how old is your kid?
Yeah. So I live in Detroit, Michigan, outside Detroit. And my son is now, I cannot believe it, 14 years old. And I also have a 14 and a 10-year-old stepsons. Nice. And then I cannot forget Carl, the dog, who is also one of the children. So
I love it. I didn't know that you had 14-year-olds. I also have 14-year-olds. So another thing we have in common.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's a whole new world, right? Like 14-year-old boys.
Oh my gosh. It's like 1 minute, it's, just like innocent young kid. All of a sudden it's like, what happened to you? Who are you? You don't want to have anything to do with us. Okay.
I know. Mine came down the other day. And remember when they're like tiny babies and you put them in the crib and then they come out bigger? I swear it's still happening. He'll
Oh,
come
totally.
downstairs and he's like, "Hi, mom," like this giant man child. And I'm like, "Did you get bigger again?" He
Seriously.
like towers over me. He's ginormous. He's hormonal all the time, which I mean, let's just talk about the cruelty of Mother Nature I'm a little bit older when I had my son, but I'm in my late 40s, so I'm perimenopause. I'm a little hormonal. He's hormonal. I'm like, we are like
Oh
two
man.
hormones just bumping into each other. So it is a journey over here in these parts.
Oh, I'm sure. I know my stepson's like 5'10" now, maybe taller. I don't even know.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah,
I
it
know.
does feel like every time I see him, like, okay, well,
Yep, there
there
they
you
go.
are. So, what led you to specialize in helping parents with co-parenting?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of us, it's what I needed to learn. It's what I had to figure out. And I made so many mistakes that I now know are avoidable had I had more information. And so I just really have made it my mission to not let any mom walk through this journey of parenting or co-parenting alone if she doesn't want to, because we don't have to do that. And so it really came from born out of my own experience and just wanting to be able to give back. I do want to say, because I know you have a very broad audience and a lot of married people, while I am a divorce and co-parenting coach, I am also super pro marriage. And I define co-parenting as parenting with anyone that you don't agree with 100% of the time. So that really across the board is everybody, because we are co-parenting. Unless we are truly doing it on our own, then you're really just single parenting. But what we're talking about is, how do you really be the mom you want to be, hold the values, raise your children in a way that feels aligned for you, regardless of what everyone else is doing. And to me, that's where our power lies. And that doesn't mean that we railroad people, but what I really like to help women is get really clear on what matters most to them so they can live in that alignment. Because when we parent and we mom from that place, we're our most powerful example for our children.
Oh my gosh, yes. And if you have worked with me or if you've been around me for a while, you know that this is exactly right up my alley and what I talk about all the time, right? It's all about empowering yourself without disrespecting other people, right?
Right?
I'm not
Yeah.
saying like be a doormat, because that is not the same as respect, right?
Right.
You can respect yourself and respect others at the same time. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree and go with whatever they're saying in order to have that dynamic. So I'm very thrilled to go into this because, yeah, it does apply to every single couple and every single parenting dynamic, whether you're a stepmom, whether you're a mom and you're co-parenting with your ex, whatever it is, you can find something from this episode because it all comes down to, well, actually, I'll let Mikki tell you because I don't want to take over here, but I have my own experiences to draw from. But can you share with us what you mean by protecting your peace? And I know you had talked to me some time ago about like staying grounded, how important that is. I'm sure a lot of people are like, what? No, like I cannot do that. That is impossible. Anytime we have a parenting difference, it just goes up through the roof and we start yelling at each other, or we start becoming this other version of ourselves that we aren't so proud of, but we feel like maybe we deserve it. So can you share with us what that all means to you and what people can do to get to that place so that they could feel more aligned with themselves and proud of who they're being? I really think that's what it comes down to, is being proud of who you're being, no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when we make the mistakes, right? Because mistakes are supposed to happen. I think it's always looking to what do we do next, right? What's that next thing? But let me step back a little bit here, because when we think about certainly in divorce, but also just parenting, and a lot of marriages end when children are in that kindergarten through fifth grade, right? And it makes sense because the first 7 years of a kid's life is really that very hands-on. It is taxing, it is overwhelming, and we are parenting in a way now that is very different from what nature intended, which is communal living, which is having a village, right? So we're really doing these things against the way that we're wired to do them, and it's very hard. Then you add on all these expectations we have, all of these standards that we have, all these ideas of what motherhood and what parenting is going to look like, right? And then you add in another person, co-parent or a partner, and they have all the same things, but we're trying to do it, right? And oftentimes we're not really communicating in the best way possible, if at all, or we're so far exhausted that we can't even show up. And that's why marriages really struggle in that time frame, is because the wear and tear of raising kids on a relationship is really, really hard. So we don't want to continue to look at the ongoing conflict or all the problems. Yes, we have to look at the problems, but as long as we are focused on that, what isn't working, all we're going to do is get more of that. So what I like to do is shift our perspective to really start talking about, well, what do you want? What matters most to you? Because with that in mind, we can start walking in that direction. Otherwise, we are just reacting to what we don't want. And that is not a place to live from. Reaction only creates more chaos, more feeling sort of unsettled or unmoored. So we actually need to settle back and do the work to be able to live in alignment with what it is that you desire, your well-being, your children's well-being, so that you are focused on that and you are showing up in support of that each and every day. And when we do that, we naturally build a home and environment for ourselves and our kids that they can thrive in. And so it really comes down to more of an intentional way of living and getting out of the reactivity, because reactivity, we see it everywhere right now with the increase in violence, in the increase in depression, loneliness, and anxiety. You know, we are just reacting to all the things that we don't want. And it is really detrimental to our well-being and our mental health. And so what I like to do is, what is the opposite of reactivity? Well, it's really taking responsibility for yourself. And I define that as response-ability. It is the ability to respond to our life. And for us to be able to do that, we have to learn how to regulate our emotions, regulate our nervous system, be able to calm ourselves down so that we are then able to make the choices and the decisions and the actions that lead us where we want to go. So I actually teach a 4-step framework, which we can get into, but it really is all about how do you become more grounded, more present, not so that you're calm and in this Buddha light state all the time, because I don't know anyone with kids that can do that. I mean, short of being alone on a mountainside, right? We can't get to that sort of Zen place, but we can find moments of it. And so the more moments of groundedness, of intention, of purpose that we can string together, then we get this beautiful sort of life that we're living. And so that's what we want to start to do.
Absolutely. And, you know, what I'm hearing from you is just the importance of being intentional, right? Mm-hmm. But you cannot be intentional without first working on your own self-awareness, mm-hmm. right? Awareness of where you're at, what your needs are, what you want, what you're working towards. Like, if you do not take a moment to get to know yourself and reflect, then you're basically just directionless. And that's where you really create breeding grounds for reactivity, right? Yeah. Reactivity is that version of yourself that you're like, ooh, why did I do that? Like, it's almost like, do you ever get like a paper cut and then almost like a second before it happens, you know it's not going to be good? Do you get that too?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. You're like, I know I shouldn't do this, but you can't stop yourself. It's like trying to stop a like freight train. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it might feel like that. But if you actually take the time, and I know some of you are rolling your eyes and you're like, what time? I don't have time. But if you take the time to actually get to know yourself better, this is what's going to allow you to hit that pause button and be like, oh, this is not a good track that I'm on right now, and turn around. Okay. Yep. And if you're the one that's like, I don't have time, I want you to think about all the times that you have spent reacting and fixing, like all that cleanup work that you've had to do because of your reactivity. So you do have time. You definitely have time.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so interesting because we all resist it. It's like we all know deep down it feels true in our bodies, yet we
Hmm.
resist, right? It really comes down to making a decision of how do you want to live? How do you want to experience this one amazing, precious life that we get? And I always define I'm, sort of a visual person. So I think of reactivity as like living in a pinball machine, right? It's like you wake up as
Mm-hmm.
soon as your eyes open, right? Maybe you grab your phone, maybe you sort of jump right out of bed and start going. Maybe you hit the snooze button and keep sleeping, whatever it is. But that pinball machine is like you're just there. And then all of a sudden you get shot out into that side area, right? And then somebody pulls the little trigger and off you go into the bright lights and all the sounds and all the paddles getting beat up. And then you end up, after getting beat up, in a black hole and put to the side just to wait for someone to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the way I want to live. And I don't think it's the way any of us want to live, but it's how we are living the majority of the time when we are unconscious, when we're unaware, and we're just reacting. So we really have to make the choice. Well, if I don't want that, what do I want? And I think to your point, there is always time. And this doesn't require hours and hours and hours every day, but it can look like 5 minutes to begin your day. It can look like not picking up your phone first thing in the morning and instead sitting in silence or just listening to your breath or prayer. Whatever it is for you, intentionally setting aside that time to let yourself matter. I think that's what it really comes down to, is just letting yourself be present with where you are and maybe asking yourself, how am I feeling today? Right? Because every day we sort of every hour we wake up to a different body, a different experience. So the more present that we can become, then we are more present for other people. That's essentially what we want to do, is be really good moms, really good partners, really good co-parents, and really good to ourselves too. But to do that, we actually have to move ourselves up on the list of priorities.
I mean, this is true self-care, mamas, okay?
Yeah,
Like, not the whole, let's get nails done, although I do need a pedicure, but like,
sure.
that's nice,
Yeah.
but does it add value to your life long term? Is it a sustainable thing that you can do all of the time at the drop of a hat? If
Yeah.
the answer is no, then you've got to also find things that you can do to give you that relief, to give you that sense of peace. And this kind of self-care, actually asking yourself how you're doing, actually asking yourself, what do I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
All day long, we are constantly wondering, what should I make for dinner? What event do I need to plan for? Should I pack for it now? Should I pack for it tomorrow? What kind of laundry will we need for that? Like, it's just so much external work that we feel too busy to even stop and ask ourselves how we're doing. And we lose it when our partners don't ask us how we're doing, but really we're needing that from ourselves. If we can give that to ourselves, then we won't put that expectation onto someone else who's also living, something probably very similar of just overstimulation all of the time, right?
Yeah. And I think, it sounds like we're just talking about self-care here, and we are talking about self-care. But there's another reason why we need to do this. There's another reason why we need to slow down and pull back on the reactivity. And it really does come down to being able to speak up with conviction, learning how to hold boundaries, right? When we talk about protecting our peace or protecting our well-being, so many of us, I wrote a whole book on people pleasing. It's like we try to be the peacekeeper and keep everybody peaceful, keep everybody happy around us, but that is at the expense of our own peace. So what we want to do is be the creator of peace, right? To be the creator of our own internal peace. And that requires that we speak up. That requires that we have integrity. That requires that we hold boundaries so that we can have the clarity in the decisions and the movement and the choices forward. But the only way to do that is to be really aware of what is going on for you. So actually taking those few minutes, learning how to check in, learning how to ask yourself, what do you need right now? is an investment in your long-term ability to have really healthy relationships with other people. But it starts with ourselves. And so I think it's an important thing to start this conversation with is when we want to co-parent well and better, it begins with being more and more honest with ourselves so that we understand what our values actually are, what is actually important to us, instead of just reacting or letting everyone else decide.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up boundaries, because to me, having solid boundaries is probably one of the biggest forms of self-care that you can possibly give to yourself, and one of the biggest forms of being in a better relationship with other people, with your kids, with your partner, with your co-parents, with anyone, really. Like, I think a lot of people view boundaries as a way to keep people out, but it's actually a way to let people in a way that it's respectful of you and them. So can we dive into how we can honor and uphold our boundaries with our co-parents, especially when things seem a little argumentative or there's like a very obvious disagreement going on how we're going to handle something, which is going to come up?
Yeah. So I'm going to step it back 1 second, and yes, to go into that conversation. And this is the framework that I teach in the book and what I teach my clients. And I didn't make it up. It's just sort of truth, right? There's like those capital T truths that come from wisdom teachings. It really comes from that. But we have 4 steps to be able to really create more intention. And these are required for boundaries or healthy relationships. The first is awareness. Which we were just talking about. We cannot change anything that we aren't aware of. So awareness really is that understanding when you're having a big emotion, when you're triggered, when you're activated, right? It's understanding the emotions that you're having. And so it always starts there. And the next step after we have awareness would be agency. Agency is simply a fancy word for choice. We always have 3 choices available. So there we can accept something, we can change, or we can leave. We can dive more into those if you want. But so it's awareness and then agency. What are the choices that I have available to me? The third step is aligned action. And this is, what is the action that you are going to take that is going to get you into alignment with what it is you desire? Right? And this is how we stay out of reactivity and how we start moving in the direction we want to go, even when we don't know what direction that is. And so then we start moving in that direction. The 4th step is accountability, right? And that's really giving yourself the support that you need or outside support that you need. And so that's sort of the 4 steps. So when we're talking about boundaries, first, like you just said, they really aren't to keep people out. They're not walls, except, you hear about, it's like TikTok is, everybody's like walling up at this point, right? And so boundaries are really all about what you will do in response to something. So that the reason that we want boundaries isn't to have a wall, but it's to have strength and flexibility to be able to move through chaos, through conflict, through anything that's happening. So for us to hold a boundary, we first have to understand what the heck is actually going on, right? We have to sort of separate the facts from the fiction and understand what's my part, what's theirs, right? Because oftentimes we're trying to carry everybody else's stuff when a boundary is really about you. So we have to decide, what is the boundary here? So I'm going to use just one example. So a lot of my clients will say the other co-parent, they don't respond, or maybe they're not very communicative. So each time that they actually do call or text or whatever, the person feels like they have to jump, right? Like, oh, this is my chance. I've got to do it now. But maybe it's not the right time for them. So like I have one client who her co-parent will only call after 10 o'clock at night. She's tired, right? He's just getting going. She's exhausted. But she used to pick up the phone because she felt like, no, this is the only time, so I have to do it. And it would always end badly because she's exhausted. She's not clear-headed. She's annoyed that he's calling at 10 o'clock, right? So we actually created the boundary that If you call after 10 p.m., I will not pick up. It doesn't say don't call me, right? Because she tried that. Don't call, call me at this time. They're not going to listen. People have free will. So she really just decided, I'm not going to pick up if they call after 10, and I'm going to try back in the morning. And you know what? Eventually, they got on the schedule that worked, right? Yes, did it take a little while? But it was first her saying, I'm not going to put myself and my sleep in the line of fire here. And she started to protect that with a boundary, right? So that's just one simple way. But we have to first be aware of what's my responsibility, what's someone else's responsibility, and then really decide what's aligned with how I want to show up and creating boundaries from that place, because that's what creates more peace and more intention and just a stronger sturdiness as an adult.
And I think you just shared something that is huge that a lot of people don't understand about boundaries, is that boundaries are about what you're going to do in response to something. Many people think that boundaries are what the other person needs to do to make you feel more comfortable. That's not a boundary. That's being controlling.
Yes.
So your example,
that's what we're living right now. Yeah.
Your example is don't call me. They're not going to respond well, because then it's oh, it has to be on your terms. It's no. You can call. I'm just going to have do not disturb on, and I won't answer because I need my sleep. Yeah. But if you want to chat, these are the times that I'm available. That's going to have a very different tone to it, and they're going to receive it different and be oh, okay, that's fine, right? And I know so many people, myself included in the past, right, where I just get upset. Why would they do that? And it all comes down to taking things personally, when really most things aren't personal, right? He was probably calling at 10 because that's when he's ready to. Maybe he wants to finish everything and then he's settled, then he can. Or maybe he just likes to stall because he doesn't like to talk to her. So he just puts it off to the last minute, whatever it is, right? Everybody has their own timing and wants and needs. And it's okay that it's different. But knowing the difference between setting healthy boundaries and being controlling is a big thing that I didn't learn until much, much later. And I want everyone to know so much earlier, because when you realize that setting boundaries is about what you're going to do, that puts you back in the driver's seat rather than hoping and wishing and trying to control people and thinking, okay, once you start doing and acting the way I need you to, then I will feel better and more peaceful. That's very disempowering. And that's never a state that we want to put ourselves in.
No, because, when you look at it, especially usually we're talking about somebody who, yes, they might be your partner. They might be someone that you very much love. They might also infuriate you at times, right? So do we want to put all of our power over to them to say, you be in charge, right? That's a horrible place to live. And so, boundaries are so important, and they're for you to set and you to uphold. And that means you have 100% control over them.
Yes. So what are some ways that you can recommend people to uphold those boundaries to form a healthier relationship with their co-parent?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head, which is starting to separate, right? Not take things so personally. And we're able to do that when we have more and more ability to see with a clearer perspective. And this might seem counterintuitive, but one of the ways that I believe that we learn how to do this and sort of desensitize ourselves to taking everything personally is to actually start creating more moments of mindfulness. So meditation. Meditation is a way for us to learn how to separate from the thoughts in our head and be present with the soul being that we are, right? We are souls having a human experience in these little meat suits that we're wearing around, which are bodies. So we have to actually learn to check in and get in touch with that inside of us, that really who we truly are, the big why you. And to do that, it's slowing down, like we talked about at the beginning of this, but learning how to create distance between yourself and your thoughts can be one of the most empowering things, because while there are people, maybe it's a co-parent or somebody negative on the outside, the vast majority of us are living with someone way more negative on the inside, and that is our thoughts, right? And so when we have a very negative self-talk, we then hear it inside our head, but we filter everything around it as negative. So we just start taking on everything as negative. We're more and more sensitive because of how much we're beating ourselves up. So actually learning how to have a better relationship with yourself is what allows you to be able to have better relationships, because you have a clearer, sort of kinder perception with yourself. You offer yourself more grace, more space. So I think learning meditation is one of those important things that we can do, because it gives us the ability to pause, like we talked about earlier, so that we actually have the chance to choose what we want to do. And it helps us separate from our thinking, and especially negative thinking, so that we can start to choose what we want to believe. And so I think that is one of those things that we absolutely need to start doing. And you can call it prayer, you can call it quiet time, you can call it meditation, whatever floats your boat, but really just taking the time to get to know yourself a little bit more, to connect to your breath, allow your thoughts to be separate from you, and build that muscle. So it's like going to the mental gym every day. I started doing this when I was a mom of a young kid, right? And so all the moms are like, you can't do it with toddlers around. You can. You can try to lock yourself in the bathroom if you need to. You can also say, Mom's actually going to have 10 minutes of quiet time, and you just sit there and let them be around you. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But you just sit and let yourself have that time. And the thing is that animals and children are like magnets to people who are meditating, because they love the energy that it gives off, right? So you almost have to expect them all to like crawl all over you, which is okay. But I think really setting aside that time to be willing to invest in yourself so that you can invest in others.
Yeah. And what better way to model to them that they get to do this for themselves too, right?
Yeah.
Because when my kids are going nuts, especially in the car, like that's especially triggering for me. I'm like, you are so loud in such a small space.
Yes.
And they're like bickering with each other. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. I'm going to need the next 5 minutes or until we get home for there to be complete silence in the car, because I need to calm down. This is very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when they don't, I just park and I get out of the car. I'm like, you let me know when you're done yelling, because I cannot handle it anymore.
Yeah.
And it actually speeds it up for them, because it's like, oh, she was not joking.
She's not kidding. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a good way to demonstrate, oh, this is how you take care of yourself. Like you said, the 3 different choices that you have, right? For me, I'm like, I'm going to remove myself if you're not going to honor my wishes right now.
Yeah.
This is what I need to not lose it.
Absolutely. And I think, it works in adult relationships as well, right? Because to say to somebody, especially when maybe things get heated, maybe there's some name calling, maybe there's, sort of tensions rising, to just say, I'm not willing to participate in a discussion that isn't respectful. Let me know when you're ready to come back to this.
Absolutely.
Out you go. Right.
Absolutely.
And so that's the process. That's really the deciding, what am I willing to participate in and what am I not? And then stepping out when you're not willing, right? The issue will be waiting for you, right? When you come back, or maybe it won't, right? Like maybe it'll resolve itself. But to not feel, I think that's part of it, is we get so defensive and we feel like we have to meet it where it's at, right? Meet that person where they are. But when we meet them with the same energy that they're coming at us with, or vice versa, it only goes higher, right? It's like if we meet our kids who are freaking out and we start yelling and freaking out, what happens? Everybody it escalates more and more. So we actually have to be that sort of counter energy to say, I'm just not willing to participate in this, but I do want to resolve it So let me know when you're ready to talk.
Yes.
And you come back, right? Keep coming
Yes.
back.
Yes. I love it. Yeah, this works in all kinds of relationships,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If this is who you want to be in the dynamic, it's going to be way more productive. And we're not saying that you have to be this 100% of the time, because that is probably not something that we can expect ourselves to be, because sometimes we're going to be at our wit's end. We're going to be tired, we're going to be hungry, we're going to be super stressed out. But we can always try again. And it's this like level of calmness that's going to de-escalate stuff. That's going to help pivot the conversation. So don't worry about calling a timeout, right? Like, it's going to be way more productive for you to temporarily exit the conversation than to stay in it and say, okay, well, no, we have to resolve it now. If this means yelling at each other, then that's what it means. You know, they say when your emotions are running high, your intelligence is running low.
Absolutely.
Which means your like emotional intelligence, your rationality, that's when you start to bring up the past, name call, criticize, and you're saying things because you're in your survival mode. You're defensive, you're critical, whatever your go-to mechanisms are, that's where you're going. But if that's not who you want to be, the way out is to change how you're reacting now, which is, okay, I know I'm going down a path that I'm not going to be able to recover from. I need to exit this conversation so that I can still maintain my composure. And that's okay. That's not you waving the white flag. That's not you abandoning them, so long as you're communicating what you're doing. And this is going to set the tone for future conversations. Like, hey, this is the type of relationship that I want with you. It doesn't seem like we're going to do that right now. So let's try again later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, repair is one of the most important things we can do, which, we're all going to make mistakes. We're supposed to make mistakes. In the movies, it's like, how do you get someone to be so hated, a character? You make them perfect and everyone hates them. Right. Yeah. And so it's like, we're not meant to be perfect. But to be able to have the, like you said, sort of composure and being able to step back and have a broader perspective, to be able to look at all sides of it without getting really attached. This is where having, a coach or a therapist or someone on board helping you really decide, like, how do I want to show up? How do I become more inclusive? How do I start to really look at things from a broader perspective? Because when we're able to do that, we actually are more powerful. We actually can show up with more intention and more direction to live the way that you want with intention. And that welcomes people in, right? Most of us have the same desire, which, especially whether it's in relationship or raising children, we want to do the best job we can. And so when we can start to look at what is working versus what isn't, and start to hone in on those things, we actually start to walk more and more in the direction that we want to go. So it's really that constant getting out of reacting from what we don't, meeting it with, that emotionality and sort of out of controlness, and not always, but walking more and more in alignment with what you do want.
Absolutely. It's kind of like, and I use this analogy all the time, but you know how like we grew up in school, they always like have us do exercises where we spot the difference, like what's different about this, right? But in our relationships, we don't want to do that, right? Because when we focus on what's different, that's what expands. That's what we start to let grow, and it becomes easier and easier to identify. What we want to do is be like, okay, that's where we're different, but where are we the same? Can we balance that out? Can we focus on what's good about this and expand from there, right?
Yep.
There's going to be differences, but if we also bring in, what are we agreeing on? Where is there commonality?
Yep.
Can we start there so that at least we can get back to being on the same team? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to co-parenting success, it's focusing on the kids. Not what we each want, but what's best for the child. Can we at least agree on that, right? Yep. Or an element of that, because sometimes we don't agree on what we think is the best for the kids, right? So what do you recommend when you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've done all that I can. And it seems like my co-parent is not participating in co-parenting in a way that seems like something that I also want to participate in. What do you do then?
Yeah. So there's a misconception that, and you just hit on it, but there's this misconception that we're all supposed to be on the same page and that is co-parenting, right? But we're never going to be on the same page all of the time. If you are divorced, you weren't on the same page when you were married, right? Like there's these things are always there. And so, I always use the analogy of being on the same team, right? If your kids are, and I don't mean this literally, but if they're the game, they're the reason that we're doing this, but you are on the same team. And likely, especially when there's a lot of conflict, you're on the same team with the last person in the world you want to be on a team with. But how do you really start to show up? And, no NFL team, NHL team, whatever, they would never go out into a game without practicing, without strength training, without having all the right equipment on, like their playbook, all of it. And so I really think that part of this is, again, like not focusing on exactly what's in front of us, but what do we need to do in order to support a healthier relationship? And when there are times of really high conflict or one person who really is not on board, then not participating with that might be the approach for a little bit, right? Actually saying, we can't come to an agreement on this, so I'm actually going to have to just keep moving forward in the direction that I feel most appropriate. And then you have to let them do what they're doing. And this is where in two household families, it's really challenging. Because you have one house doing one thing, one house doing the other. And there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in that. But when we keep it focused on what is in the child's best interest, and that you are working in that direction, that is literally all you can do. And part of it is just learning how to let go of the expectations, let go of the anger and resentment, let go of the frustration of what isn't working, and really shifting into how can I show up for this little person who we love, and how can I show up in the best way possible? And we stay focused on that. Now, the caveat is always abuse. If there is any physical, emotional, sexual abuse, that is not okay. There are going to be things that one parent deems okay and one doesn't. And that's where we have to really learn to separate what we have control over and what we don't, and how we're going to react or how we're going to respond with our own life and there. And that's really, it's very nuanced. And that's where I think accountability and having a support system is so vital. Because it is really challenging to navigate a lot of adult emotions. Then you add in all the kid emotions, and then you add in all the complexities. It is really challenging. And so I think we need support to be able to stay very clear-headed, decisive, and really focused on well-being.
Yeah, and there's no shame around it at all. No. I'll admit that in the earlier years of our co-parenting journey, because, my husband and I share our oldest son with our son's mom and stepdad. Thank goodness we all get along now. Like, we moved across the country to be closer to them so that our son can have all four parents with him. And we hang out all the time, and we're just like one big happy family. Yeah. But we never thought we'd get to this point. But honestly, like, we've had to use mediators. We've had to work with people to help us navigate all the complexities of disagreeing. Thankfully, we both respect that the other person generally wants the best for our shared son. And so there was no questioning of that. It was just, what's the best route? And so I'm so grateful for people like you who do what you do, because it does get messy, because it is emotional. Like, no one thinks that they're going to have to co-parent with a whole other side with potentially different views. And it just makes things way more challenging. And it doesn't always have to be that way. And if you're in this space where you are just like, it just does feel like you're on two sides of a coin, that doesn't mean that you have to just feel defeated all the time. You can make your own little world when you have your time with your kids, and then they can have their own. Because there was a period of time where we were doing parallel parenting, and we weren't in a space where we can collaborate and talk through things. And thank goodness that's changed now. I'm so relieved.
Yeah. And I think it changes. What I wanted to bring up too is because sometimes this can happen within your own house, right?
Oh,
when you and your spouse are not agreeing on something, maybe it's the way one parent disciplines or doesn't or whatever. As long as we are fighting against, we are just adding more fuel to that fire. And so it really is that counterintuitive, but it's like, how much are you just playing tug of war with the other person? And when you feel like you're in that tug of war, drop the rope.
Yes.
Like just drop it and back away. Because when you drop it, all of your energy then goes back into you so that you can start to decide, how do I want to show up here instead of just fighting? And that's, I think, one of the things is that we have to really look at, what am I fighting against versus what am I fighting for? Now, if you are fighting for something, right? Like if there's something, there are battles that we're all going to, be willing to fight. But the vast majority of the things that are sucking all of your energy and emotions, a lot of times are the things that maybe we don't need to be fighting about. And so we have to really choose. They say pick your battles, but I say pick where your attention and your energy is going. And really start to take ownership over that. Take that back. You do not have to attend every fight that you're invited to. And so just saying no, thank you.
Yeah, and
can be really powerful.
Aren't worth it, because then you just end up in that cycle where you're fighting just to fight, but there is actually no point to the fight. If you were to actually remove yourself from the situation and ask yourself, does this actually matter to me that much? Or is it just annoying?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's gonna be like, oh, it's just annoying, let's make sure that we're putting our energy into things that actually matter and move the needle for us, rather than just being reactive, being so easily pulled into things.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation. I know, Mikki, that you have something called a co-parenting audit. Can you share a little bit about that and who it's for?
Yeah. So I actually sort of am calling it the relationship audit right now, right? Because I think co-parenting gets confusing because we think it's only about, co-parenting with an ex or divorce, but really looking at our relationships, right? If we want to have a more healthy relationship, if we want to co-parent differently, I created a little audit. And so you can look at your co-parenting, you can look at one relationship, you could look at your relationship with your kids. We really pick one area and we do a life audit for that area. We pull apart, like I said before, sort of the facts from the fiction. We really decide what's working, what isn't working, what do you want to change? We start to parse all that apart. So you do that on your own. And then you and I will get on a call for 1 hour together, and we actually create a decision of what you want to focus on, and we create the actionable plan for you to get it. So what do I mean? It's like we decide where we want to go, and then we reverse engineer how we're going to get there. And so then you have 2 weeks of Voxer support. Voxer is a walkie-talkie app on the phone. So we can go back and forth so that you have that accountability that you need to actually move the needle. And so you get that for 2 weeks. So it's very short, easy, approachable way to start to feel some real momentum and change in your relationships or your co-parenting.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's really low cost, high touch, because you get me as your coach for 2 weeks, and really just learn how to set yourself up in this intentional format so that you can start to do it over and over and over again.
So what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, my website and Instagram are both the same, just my name, which is mikkigardner.com. I have Co-Parenting with Confidence, the podcast that I put out, and Michelle, you're going to be on that. I'm so excited. And I also have my book, which is The People Pleaser's Guide to Co-Parenting Well, but all of those can be found on my website.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Listeners, if you have resonated with what Mikki has shared and you want to learn more from her, go please check her out. Let her know you found her from this episode. And before I let you go, Mikki, I love to ask my guests a question so that listeners can get to know you better. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. What is your favorite trashy TV show?
Okay, so I don't know that it's technically trashy, but I think it falls within this range. But I just finished the newest season of Bridgerton. And
I love that show.
I gotta say, I love it.
I'm like, oh my gosh, when's the next season? Even though they just came out with this.
Well, and I was a huge Steel Magnolias fan on Netflix.
Oh, yes.
And so I'm like just waiting for that to come back. But and I guess the other thing, I'll just put it out there, just confession time. I love the Hallmark Channel.
Oh, yes.
Like, I don't know why it started with just holiday time, but I watch it year round. I put it on for the dog because I think nothing bad happens on it. So if I'm gone, he's safe. But it's that might be my other one. So yeah.
Oh, I love all of that. Oh my gosh. If you haven't watched this movie yet, I think it's on Prime. It's called The Idea of You. Have you watched that movie?
No, I think I saw it somewhere. Is it good?
You need to watch it.
I might be doing that
watch
tonight.
It's Anne Hathaway.
Oh, okay.
And it's about a woman who's turning 40 and she's divorced and meets this young pop star.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. I might watch that.
Yeah, you'll have to watch it. It's a good show. It's got all the feels and pretty good music, actually. So,
okay.
Yeah,
there you go.
I highly recommend it. I've watched it twice. I probably will watch it some more. I don't know why, but I just like something about this movie I just really love. Like,
yeah, I love that. I love that. We all need some feel-good stuff. I think that's what I love, like Bridgerton and even the Hallmark. We need to sort of fill up those buckets, even if it's unrealistic. Why not? Just enjoy.
Yes. Well, thanks again for being a part of the show. Again, go check her out. And thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this episode. Feel free to send me a message. Let me know what your biggest takeaway was. And I'll catch you back here on the next episode. Bye.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perda Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.